Mercedes McLaren SLR exists because two companies were solving different problems inside the same car. And that contradiction quietly ended one of the most powerful partnerships in automotive history. Because when companies like Mercedes and McLaren come together to build a supercar, expectations are naturally massive. This wasn't just any collaboration. The partnership began in Formula One, where McLaren built the cars and Mercedes supplied the engines. Together, they won races, championships, global respect. At some point, both companies asked a dangerous question. If we can dominate Formula One together, why not build a road car that can dominate Ferrari and Lamborghini too? On paper, the idea was unbeatable. In reality, it became one of the most misunderstood supercars ever built. This car weighs over 1,700 kilograms. It has carbon fiber everywhere, powered by a hand-built AMG V8. Carbon ceramic brakes, backed by two giants at the peak of their powers. And yet, McLaren engineers said it was too soft. Mercedes engineers said it was too extreme. That should be impossible. This isn't the story of a bad supercar. It's the story of what happens when engineering goals don't align. And nobody has the authority to say no. The biggest argument wasn't horsepower, it was layout. Because that's where everything broke. Let's open with the decision that doomed the SLR from day one. Mercedes insisted on a front mid-engine layout. Not mid-engine, not rear engine, front mid. That single choice affected everything. The engine sat ahead of the driver, but behind the front axle. A 5.4-liter supercharged V8. Over 600 horsepower, an iron block, huge torque. This created a car with a long nose, heavy front bias, and massive inertia. McLaren engineers warned them. Mercedes didn't listen, because Mercedes wasn't chasing lap times. They were chasing identity. And from that moment on, the SLR was no longer an engineering project. It was a negotiation. McLaren wanted a race-bred supercar. Mercedes wanted a luxury Halo's GT. Same project. Opposite philosophies. McLaren believed performance should shape the car. Mercedes believed the car should never intimidate the driver. So, instead of one clear vision, the SLR became a compromise machine. And compromises kill supercars. The AMG M155 V8 was brutal, supercharged, hand-built, monstrous torque. But it was also heavy, long, and thermally aggressive. McLaren preferred a lighter, reviver setup. Mercedes wanted torquey everywhere, and durability above all else. The result? An engine that was spectacular in isolation, but architecturally wrong for the chassis it lived in. This forced McLaren to engineer around mass instead of exploiting balance. And that's never a winning formula. McLaren builds cars around feedback, steering feel, weight transfer, chassis communication. The SLR had none of that. Why? Because Mercedes insisted on softer suspension tuning, stability systems that intervened early, a driving experience that felt secure. The car was fast, but filtered. And for McLaren, filtered meant compromised. This wasn't a machine that rewarded precision. It rewarded confidence without consequence. That sounds good on paper, but enthusiasts felt the disconnect immediately. Carbon fiber body, carbon tub, exotic materials everywhere. And still, the SLR weighed over 1,700 kilograms. That's heavy even by modern standards. Back then, it was unforgivable. Most of that weight sat over the front axle, which meant understeer at the limit, delayed turn-in. A car that resisted rotation. McLaren engineers could mask it, they couldn't eliminate it, and Mercedes didn't want to hear why. Mercedes chose a 5-speed automatic, not a dual clutch, not a manual, an automatic. At a time when Ferrari was pushing F1 gearboxes and Porsche was refining manuals. Why? Smoothness, longevity, luxury. McLaren hated it. Because no amount of tuning can make a torque converter feel like a precision instrument. Shifts were slow, power delivery was blunt. The car surged instead of flowed. Again, two philosophies, one vehicle. Here's the part most people miss. Mercedes owned 40% of McLaren at the time. That changed the dynamic completely. McLaren wasn't a partner, They were a supplier with opinions. Mercedes had final say, and Mercedes always chose comfort over sharpness, stability over engagement, broad appeal over purity. The SLR wasn't allowed to be extreme, and supercars that aren't extreme fade fast. That was the biggest problem of all. It wasn't a track weapon, it wasn't a luxury cruiser, it wasn't a pure supercar. It lived in an uncomfortable middle ground, too harsh for GT buyers, too soft for enthusiasts. Ferrari had clarity, Lamborghini had drama, Porsche had precision, the SLR had confusion, and confusion kills desirability. Inside McLaren, frustration grew. They were building a car that didn't represent them. Every compromise diluted their reputation. Every review reinforced it. Fast but numb, powerful but distant, impressive but uninvolving. McLaren didn't want to be associated with that long term. So when the contract window opened, they didn't fight to renew it. They prepared to leave. Because Mercedes had learned something too. They didn't want to build supercars the McLaren way. They wanted control, full ownership of philosophy, full ownership of branding, full ownership of engineering direction. And they already had the answer. AMG. The SLR wasn't a waste, it was a lesson. Mercedes learned they didn't want shared control, they didn't want racing purism. They wanted luxury performance with intimidation removed. That insight directly led to modern AMG cars. Front engine, massive torque, refined brutality. The SLR was the prototype mindset. People ask why Mercedes never built another SLR. Because they didn't need to. The SLR wasn't a product line. It was an experiment. Once it delivered its lesson, Mercedes moved on. AMG took over. SLS AMG, AMG GT, Black Series, Project 1. No partners, no compromises, one car philosophy. McLaren left and did something radical. They built their own road car, the MP4-12C carbon tub, mid-engine, clinical precision, everything the SLR wasn't allowed to be. That wasn't coincidence, that was liberation. It just didn't belong to anyone. Mercedes never fully claimed it, McLaren never fully embraced it. And so, it exists today as an orphan supercar, incredibly fast, technically fascinating, emotionally distant, a reminder that greatness requires alignment. The Mercedes-McLaren SLR wasn't killed by bad engineering. It was killed by misaligned ambition. Two giants, two visions, one car that couldn't satisfy either. And that's why Mercedes walked away. Not because the SLR was weak, but because it proved that power without unity is pointless. So, here's the real question. If Mercedes had let McLaren build the car they wanted, or if McLaren had accepted Mercedes' restraint, would the SLR be remembered as a legend? Or was this breakup inevitable the moment two companies tried to build one car for two completely different futures?